common forehand problems, technique problems, and fixes. I'm going to try to give you some fixes through a podcast or a video podcast, but I'll try to share with you some of my wisdom regarding technique and biomechanics. As you may know, I am the coach of many #1 players in the United States and top national champions. I'm a full-time high-performance coach, developing prodigies and top players. I work with competitive adult serious players, and I'm the author of The Secrets of Spanish Tennis and the new biomechanics and technique book coming out, Winning Pretty, which I think will be the best technique book on the market. It's coming out fairly soon. It's coming out digitally right now on tennisplayer.net, the world's best tennis technique magazine, but the paperback's not out till 2025. So look for that, Winning Pretty. I consider myself an expert on technique and biomechanics, and I can also take your questions here. We can talk about some specific solutions for your ground strokes or your forehand in particular. Today's show is about the forehand. I figured that's a common concern for a lot of folks. Everybody wants the ATP forehand, which I teach. They want that stretch shortening cycle. They want that elastic whipping forehand with the short range of motion. We can talk about that, some of the secrets and some of the tricks on how to get that going. We can talk about your own personal forehand issues. I'd like to go over some of the common issues that I see with the forehand in my students. I work with a lot of young students. I do work with adults from time to time. My main job on the court is training juniors, high performance juniors, but I do have adults who come to me to work on their technique, and I enjoy that as well. So if you have any questions, if you're catching the show live, let me know. And let's talk about a few important aspects of technique for the forehand and how do you fix that. Some of the solutions may not be possible to convey with a podcast, but I'll do the best I can. And if you're still stuck, you can even send me some of your videos. I take videos at my WhatsApp number, 914-462-2912. That's Chris Lewitt, Lewit. You can send me your video on WhatsApp free of charge, and I just take a look and I can give you some feedback. I work with players around the world like that. So feel free if you have sort of a specific concern to you that I can't give general advice through the podcast, then let me know and I'll take a look in the video, and I oftentimes make a slow motion or high-speed video analysis for players, and I can help you that way as well. So with the forehand, I just did a top 3 list where I talked about common issues that can be solved the Spanish way. So I'd like to start there. I think the most important thing of all is spacing. And how do you get good spacing on the forehand? That's related to your eyes and your feet. So I just think that's a great place to start. For most recreational adults that I see, for lots of young kids under 10 whom I coach, the spacing is one of the first go-to things that I work on. And I really think that should be the model for almost every coach and every player, because if you don't have the spacing right, a lot of other things are going to go badly. And spacing is basically the optimal distance between your trunk and the ball at impact. On the forehand, one of the ways you can measure that, if you're not sure, like, what does that mean, spacing? Brian Gordon, the PhD biomechanist, says it should be about 150 degrees, more or less, or preferably more. And so that's one simple way. If you can imagine a 150 degree angle with the arm outstretched at the impact point, I recommend looking for a 150 degree angle, an obtuse angle at the impact. And that will tell you whether you had reasonable spacing or not. If you film with video, and I suggest you definitely film if you're trying to improve your forehand or the forehand of your son or daughter or one of your students. I know I have a lot of coaches who watch the show as well. Look for that 150 degree angle in the arm. And if you don't have that, you definitely have some things to work on. Film that, look at the angle. Is the arm straight, which would be closer to 180 degrees? Is the arm slightly bent, preferably above 150 degrees? Or is the arm really, really cramped in an acute angle. I see many, many players with acute angles in their arm at the impact. And basically that means you are cramped and you're not transferring the energy as efficiently as you could to the ball. And you're also not going to be able to get as much topspin and pace combined as with a straighter arm style forehand. So straighter arm type is better. The straighter you can get it is better. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, okay, yeah, but how do I do that? Like, it's so difficult. Well, you start with the spacing. So start working on the proper distancing, the optimal distancing between your trunk, your body, and the ball. So, what can I tell you as what do I work on the court with students? I like to think about a force field. You may find this helpful, especially if you like science fiction movies or Star Wars or, Star Trek. Force field. You have like a energy field around you. Or sometimes I use the word perimeter. Most of my family's in the military, going back generations. So I think about soldiers in battle, and you set up a perimeter to keep your troops safe, to keep your team safe. So on the forehand, I highly recommend thinking about setting up a fence, a perimeter, a force field around your body, a big space that you cannot let the ball corrupt or trespass past. So I think that visual is extremely helpful. I even use that myself sometimes, because one of the first things I work on when I'm coming back to the court is to try to get that optimal distancing, that proper measurement between my trunk, my center, my body, and the ball. And that's what I notice when I take a break from tennis, is that's commonly lost. So if you can imagine you're playing and you develop this force field, this perimeter around you, I think it's absolutely essential, and it's like huge priority. And before you start to work on all these other technical details, start with the force field, start with the spacing, the perimeter. Create a safe perimeter around your body. If you remember during COVID, that people tried to keep 6 feet or a safe social distance from other people away from their body. And in this case, you want to keep this safe distance with the ball. The ball is coming. Sometimes the ball is coming very fast, and you need to see it with your eyes, position your body with great footwork, and receive it. And the best way to receive it is you need the space. You need the space to operate. You need the space to manipulate the racket and transfer energy to the ball. And in my experience, over 25 years now, working in the trenches, building technique with young kids, adults, all different levels, elite champions, average kids and adults, I think that's just the most important thing you can work on. And I don't see many lessons focusing on that. In fact, I first learned that stuff, 20 years ago studying in Spain. And that spacing, that idea of receiving the ball with the proper measurement and proper distancing is an absolute obsession in Spain. So a lot of the way that I see the game and the way that I'm building technique comes from Spain. And after spending so many years in Spain studying, that's how I see players. And when I come back to the US, I just noticed that most kids or adults, they never even think about that very much. They're always thinking about like the grip, and we can talk about the grip, or they're thinking about the backswing, or they're thinking about, how much to turn their hips, or how much to bend their knees, or whatever it is, right? Or to rotate this shoulder, or to follow through here. We see a lot of American lessons where people are focusing on the follow through, but the spacing is totally wrong. Like, to me, this is a total bonehead type lesson. It's a completely wrong focus. The first focus should be the spacing, should be the distancing between the trunk and the ball. And that's really hard for some people to master. Once you get in the habit of being cramped and receiving the ball with bent arms, it can become tough to break that habit. So one of the things that I'll do is toss the ball very softly using hand feeding, which is common also in Spain. I recommend you find a friend or a coach, or if you are a coach, use a hand feeding, use soft tossing. Let the ball come in slowly and learn to receive the ball correctly at a slow pace. You have to start at a slow pace where your eyes can read the incoming ball, and then you can work on the positioning of your feet to receive that ball properly. And then you can use video analysis, put your camera up there, your phone, or have someone observe and make sure. It can be a little tricky to see with the naked eye. Some people need to use video to check their extension, to check what the angle is in their arm. We're talking about forehand, but this could easily be applied to the backhand as well, because spacing is critical on ground strokes. And it's fundamental on ground strokes. You look for that 150-degree angle, or you measure the angle. With high-speed video, you can freeze frame, or with certain I have software where I can freeze the video and I can mark up the angle of the arm, and you can actually measure the angle of the arm, and you don't want to see an acute angle. I have some players, even just this last week, 2 weeks coming here working with me, have players here from around the country, and I see angles at impact that are 60 degrees or 75 degrees or 90 degrees. And to me, this is very, very suboptimal. And what am I going to do? Yell at the kid to extend more? I think that's bad coaching. What I need to do is create the force field, create the space around the player's body, to create that awareness of how much space they need, and then to swing in a way that they can extend their arm and get the racket optimally to impact the ball. So those are a few ideas I have for you. Start slowly. Use a very soft setting on a ball machine. Have someone toss the ball softly to you. You can toss the ball to yourself. You can toss the ball up, let it bounce, and you can work on your orientation to the ball, your awareness, your spatial awareness in relationship to the ball. And I promise you, for most people are cramped. It's rare that I have people who position too far away and are reaching. But that's actually a good way to trick yourself to learn this. I often have students try to reach, try to stretch. I say, try to be too far away. And they don't like that feeling. But when they do it, their arm is actually starting to approximate the 150-degree angle or more that I need. And we kind of work from there. So if you're cramped and you're stuck and you just have a heck of a time learning that spacing, try to stretch your body out. Try to reach too far. Keep the ball too far away from you and reach, and even risk being off balance to learn how to reach and extend out to the ball optimally. And then you can slowly change that muscle memory. You can myelinate a new neuromotor pattern to get that forehand more optimal, to get that forehand better. So those are some little tricks that I use to get the spacing, to get the extension, to get that straighter arm type forehand that from the research that we have, albeit paltry or not ideal, that we don't have a lot of tennis research, but from the limited research that we have, 150-degree angle or more on the forehand is optimal from what we know at this time. We need further studies. So that's what I would recommend to you guys as a place to start. If you have your forehand, make sure you have that spacing and the 150-degree angle. And if you don't, try to work on it. It's interesting, you see some top players in the world who don't have that, especially at the top of the women's game. You have Iga Swiatek and you have Coco Gauff, who are more cramped, especially Iga. She's very acute in her angle. You see a lot of women like that. I think they hit the ball suboptimally. You do also see a lot of women coming up hitting more of the ATP style forehand, where they're more extended, where they have a short range of motion in the backswing. So I think that is changing over time, but it is true that there are successful players who have quite a bent, cramped arm at impact. Usually the men have more extended angles, and sometimes the angle can vary depending on the grip, whether you have a big Western grip or more of a semi-Western or Eastern grip. So that can affect the extension somewhat as well. But in general, you want more space than less. That's what I tell my students, more space than less. And most people have less. They don't have a lot of space. All right, so I'll try not to talk the whole show about space, but I think you can tell that it's a huge priority. Another thing, body control. I talked about this in a recent video. Most people do not have good body control. And what I mean by that is like a kinesthetic awareness of what's happening with their body, good posture, good balance. These are like the key things, the fundamental things that everybody needs to work on, especially recreational players, recreational adults, recreational juniors. Oh, good Lord. If you see the way a lot of kids in the 10 and under programs hit the ball, you see the way a lot of adults hit the ball who are not well trained, and there's no body control. So I would say this is another important thing that I learned from Spain. In Spain, they're obsessed with posture. They're obsessed with moving gracefully and in controlling the body during the acceleration of the swing. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is. I don't want to be working on grips or follow through or the ATP backswing or any of that stuff if I don't have a kid who's balanced, if I don't have a kid with good posture, if I don't have a student who can control their head when they're swinging. So I work a lot on the quiet eye. If you're not familiar with the research on the quiet eye, it's basically the idea of keeping your head still. Not only does it help the balance and the control of your body, but it also helps you focus better. So it's not actually a visual help, but it actually helps you focus and stay calm so that you can strike the ball better. There's a lot of research on the quiet eye by a PhD researcher named Joan Vickers. You can look up her research on the quiet eye, Vickers, Vickers, Vickers. So it's fascinating research in a number of sports, not just helping in tennis, but in, for example, shooting a basketball or hitting a golf putt, putting, for example, that kind of thing. Anyway, the head needs to be very quiet. The head needs to be still. The body can't be flailing around. The body can't be wild and out of control. The balance has to be there. The hips need to be wide and stable. The feet need to be wide and stable. The trunk typically is vertical. I see so many players that violate these basic principles, but they're taking lesson after lesson. The coach is talking about the follow through, follow through to your shoulder. Or the coach is like futzing around, fiddling around with the grips for 6 months when the player has no body control. Or messing around with the grip, or trying to fix a backswing when the player has suboptimal spacing. To me, this is completely backwards the way to teach. You start with the spacing, you start with the body control. And this is basically the essential part of my method. This is some of the things that I argue in my new book, Winning Pretty. Talk about these important priorities that are more important than what we usually focus on in a typical lesson, especially here in the United States. So, body control. When you see a kid or adult who's wild, they're swinging for the fences, their body's flailing, you got to calm that situation down. Think of the Taylor Swift song. I've listened to a lot of Taylor Swift on the tennis court. And, you need to calm down. That's too crazy, and that doesn't mean always swinging necessarily slower. What's up, Henry? My student Henry's on the program. Hey, buddy, good to see you. It's not necessarily swinging slow. It's just learning how to swing fast, because you want to swing fast. You need acceleration. We can talk about that too, because a lot of people don't have acceleration. But you need to learn a way to swing fast without being wild with the parts of your body that matter, like your head or your arms or your legs, or you're learning to keep your trunk vertical, learning to widen and abduct your hips, abduct your hips during accelerations, things like that. I don't see people teaching that a lot. I don't see that as a common methodology here in the United States, for sure. Something that they do work on more in Spain, it's actually one of the fundamental core technical things that they work on in Spain, keeping the posture as you accelerate. That's very common in the Bruguera system of Spanish training, which I wrote about in my book, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis. So I think that's another important one. Body control. Just film yourself hitting. Film your kid. If you're a coach, look for these things. You'll see players, their heads bobbing around, bodies leaning back, bodies lunging to the side, bending at the waist, no trunk control, no vertical trunk. All these things, it's real easy to spot if you know what you're looking for. And most people aren't working on that stuff. You know, they're working on other things that to me are not priorities of the highest order. You know, everything has its priority when you're building technique. So I would say that's critical. A lot of times the loss of body control is related or associated with the lack of spacing. So it gets back to that force field concept. That's going to allow the player to swing and control their body better. As soon as you lose your spacing, as soon as you lose that good relationship with the ball, your body control is going to suffer. Your balance is going to suffer. Your posture is going to suffer. So I think understanding how all these interconnect and then working on these first as a priority over other extraneous things, less important things, is going to help you fix your forehand a lot faster and a lot more easily than the other way around. As I've seen a lot of people taking lesson after lesson after lesson and their forehand sucks and they can't figure it out because they're violating some of these basic core principles that I'm talking about. The third basic core principle, as you may know, is elasticity, is being relaxed, is having the joint structure relatively loose so you can generate more effortless power, so you can get whip, so you can get lag. You know, if you want a modern ATP forehand, you need to develop lag. You can't get lag without an elastic arm. Your arm has to be kind of like a whip. So, you know, most people that I see, again, this is like fundamental stuff. They are so freaking tight, so rigid. I call it locked sometimes. Their arm is locked on the forehand, locked arm. And you can just feel it. Sometimes you can see it visually. You can see the tension through the grip, through the elbow, through the shoulder. You see a locked, rigid arm, which I think is a huge mistake. So again, I find this incredible that you watch regular lessons around the United States at clubs with well-established coaches sometimes. They're working on stepping into the ball. They're working on bending your knees. They're working on the backswing. They're working on changing the grip to make the grip more quote-unquote correct. They're working on, you know, you've worked on the follow-through to the shoulder. You know, I call it just dinosaur stuff, just outdated stuff that's irrelevant a lot of times, irrelevant to hitting the ball well, weight transfer, stuff like that. Yelling at a student or reminding a student constantly to extend. Make sure you extend and really hit through the ball. But the real issue is the player's not spaced correctly in relationship to the ball, so the kid or the adult can extend. And you're going to keep telling them that lesson after lesson after lesson. And people are going to hear that lesson and they're going to get real frustrated. They can't extend right. But it goes back to the first thing I said, spacing. So with, you know, what's a common desire, a goal for most people with their forehand? They want to hit their forehand with more power. How many lessons have I had, especially with adults? Adults usually want more power. They want more power on their forehand. You can't get that if you're rigid. So a lot of adults super locked in their arm. They try to hit the forehand with a locked arm, and the kinetic chain's all broken. You can't get lag, or like you see players trying to learn from some stupid YouTube videos out there where they're trying to force the lag, and they end up doing it in a really tight way. It's not a natural way to create lag. It's not a fluid way to create lag. Their arm is too locked, but then they try to lag and can totally mess up your arm that way. You can get injured that way. You're creating lots of loads on the joints that way. So you see that commonly too. But the way to do it is to learn how to relax your arm. Easier said than done, especially trying to guide you through a podcast. But you can develop that. Again, I recommend starting slowly, soft feeding, shadow swinging. Trace the movement that you want. Trace that flowing parabolic shape of the modern forehand. And try to swing faster and faster progressively, but with a very relaxed arm. You should hear wind moving through the strings. And you may need someone to come and help you, either a coach or a friend or a partner. It's hard to check tension on video. You might be able to see it on video if you have a good eye, how locked you are. You might have to have someone, come and check the tension in your arm, but there has to be a way to gauge and gauge the tension and develop less tension in your arm if you want to hit a world-class forehand. You simply can't learn a great forehand. The forehands that you see on television of the top pros, they're very elastic and loose when they swing, and that takes some for many people that's very hard to develop. Most people get very, very rigid when they're trying to hit the ball harder. Like, that's very common. So you have to learn how to relax the arm as you're swinging faster and faster. A lot of shadowing. You can do a lot of hand tossing, have a partner hand toss you, or you toss to yourself, or ball machine. You can film it. Does it look fluid? Does it look forced? Does it look rigid? Does the swing, have those characteristics? Or is the swing flowing? Are you getting extension? Are you getting that distance from the ball? Connecting back to the spacing, and this is why the spacing and body orientation I talked about first, and it's one of the first things I always talk about with students who come to train with me. If you don't have the spacing and you get cramped, your body, your arm, your joints all usually lock up. They get very rigid and you have to force the swing. Sometimes that's called a muscled swing. And you see forehands that are muscled constantly, all the time. Club level, recreational players, juniors, lots of kids under 10. I work with hundreds of kids under 10, some that are going on to the pro tour someday, some that are going to play college, some that are just going to be great high school players, all different levels of kids, and most of them, almost all of them are locked. They're rigid in their arm. They have no lag, they have no chance of getting lag, their spacing is wrong, their relationship with the ball, they're fighting the ball. There's no peaceful, harmonious relationship with the ball. That's a phrase they use in Spain a lot. They're fighting the ball. So everything is screwed. Everything's a mess. And they have no body control. There's chaos when they swing, especially if they're trying to hit the ball hard. No balance, no posture. So this is like the epidemic of the forehands that I see. And the same is true more or less for the backhand side, because you want to get world-class forehand and backhand going, and a lot of these principles apply to the backhand as well. This show is kind of focusing on the forehand, getting that ATP forehand. Can't get everybody wants the ATP forehand. You just cannot get it without these basic building blocks that I'm describing. But you very rarely see a lesson focusing on those things. You see a lesson focusing on all that other garbage that I mentioned to you. It may not be garbage, but they may be secondary factors. They're not the highest priority items on the list, because everything comes in its order. Everything needs to be organized in a logical way. So if you start working on something 3, 4 levels down in importance, that can be fixed by working on the right things first. You're way off. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. I'll keep sharing a few things that I see, that may help you if you're struggling with your forehand, or maybe your kid's forehand, or I see a lot of 10-year-old, a lot of 10 and under kids with very bad technique. So maybe one of your kids' forehand. Maybe you're a coach and you're wondering, can you post that comment again? We have a question. I think it's about the finishes, because that's actually, I was planning to talk about the finishes before I finish on this podcast. But the finishes we can talk about. A lot of people like to teach the follow through. In my experience, most American coaches are obsessed with the follow through, which I think is a huge mistake. It's not that important, especially in the order of things, in the organization of things, compared to what I was saying before. Like, those things are way higher priority than the follow through. But there's some cool things that you can do with the follow through. Especially the follow through can be a very good diagnostic for elasticity, how relaxed the player's arm structure is. If the way we teach the follow through, I think is completely wrong in American tennis. We almost always teach the traditional follow through to the shoulder, to the neck, to the ear, especially in 10 and under, in red, orange, green tennis. I think it's completely wrong. I wouldn't teach that follow through anymore. For one reason, you may think I'm crazy, but I'm not. For one reason, nobody really follows through like that anymore at the top level. So why do we teach that? Most pros do not follow through on top of their shoulder anymore. Most pros follow through to the side of the shoulder because they're getting more wipering action, which is anatomically is shoulder internal rotation. They have more there's more and more shoulder internal rotation in the modern forehand. So what you're seeing is finishes that are getting lower and lower based on the amount of internal shoulder rotation, which is commonly known as wipering, like a windshield wiper action. So why do we teach that to young kids? Why do we teach that to all the adults at the club? I think it's just outdated. To me, it's not the future of technique. It's not where the game is going technically. It's not the way most pros swing anymore. You can see that with high-speed video. It's right in front of your eyes. Are there some exceptions? Sure. But the big issue that I have with teaching the follow-through to above the shoulder in that low to high, the idea of low to high, which we've all probably heard. Coaches are instructed to teach their students to swing low to high, which I think is somewhat wrong. Is that you get locked. It's a great way to lock out an arm. It's a great way to create rigidity and tension in an arm. You have to use the effort of the deltoid. You have to use the shoulder to lift the weight of the racket. You have to lift the racket up higher, which creates tension in the arm structure. You have to use muscular force to lift the racket up. What I teach and what I recommend for all you guys is let the racket drift. Don't try to lift the racket higher with muscular effort. Accelerate, extend. You're going to rotate internally the shoulder. You're going to get that wipering action. And at that point, as the racket's decelerating, just let it drift. I coined the phrase drift. Let that thing drift. And what I mean by drift is don't put any muscular effort into it. By forcing it up high, you're going against gravity. Let gravity be your friend, and just let that racket gravity drop at the end of the swing. You want a parabolic shape, so that's a circular swing path. You can just use the visual of a circle. You don't want to swing straight through in a straight line, more or less, like an old-fashioned swing from the 60s and 70s. You want to swing parabolically. If you can try to get the visual of swinging around the globe or around the world or around a giant physio ball or whatever it is, you want to get this idea of swinging in a big circle. You're tracing a big circle, more or less. It's a lot like a hook. I do a lot of boxing. It's one of my hobbies. It's a lot more like a hook punch than a straight punch, but I see lots of people hitting their forehands more like in a linear, straight fashion. So you're trying to visualize, and this may help you, to swing around the world in a big circle, and you're trying to be super relaxed and elastic as you're swinging around the world. And at the post-impact, after the impact, you don't want to use any muscular force to lift the racket. Let the racket drift. This is what I talk about in my new book, Winning Pretty. Let the racket drift, and many times you will see the racket invert at the finish. Invert means that the racket is lower than your hand and elbow. Rather than forcing the racket up high above the elbow, I have to use my bicep. I have to use my deltoid to lift the racket. Let the racket relax. The racket is heavy, 250, 300 grams, 320 grams. The racket's gonna fall with gravity. Let it fall. Let it drift. And let the racket invert. To me, that's a very good sign when you see the racket lower than the elbow and the forearm and the wrist in the finish. So that's a cue. If you're gonna work on follow-throughs, I'm hoping you're working on the other stuff first, the spacing, the body control, trying to encourage elasticity, posture, all that good stuff, head control, quiet eye, all those important things. Work on those things. And then if you want to work on finishes, that's great. That's okay. Understand where it fits in the priority, and don't teach a finish that creates a locked arm. Whatever you do, please, if you're like, think that I'm an idiot and that I don't know anything about coaching or biomechanics, and you're convinced that the follow-through should be here, okay. If you want to do that, please just don't let the kid do that or the adult do that with a rigid arm. You can follow through up around here. There's a way to do that and try to maintain a relaxation and looseness in the arm, a good elasticity, and sometimes that can be acceptable. The easiest thing is just to invert the finish, work on a lower finish, work on a finish to this. A good finish for a lot of people, just try to go to the side of the deltoid or the side of the bicep or to the elbow. I talk about making a shelf and following through to the elbow. Elbow finish is very common nowadays with the modern forehand. So you want to get that A-to-B forehand, you want to get a modern forehand. Stop teaching and stop learning. Stop working on following through high to the top of the shoulder, to the ear. Same thing with catching. Very few players catch the racket anymore. There's a way to catch the racket and be super relaxed and whippy, but most people catch the racket totally wrong. Juniors, adults, recreational players, high-performance juniors. It's a mess. People catch the racket. It creates tension. As I'm doing this, I'm feeling the tension in both shoulders and arms, and it also promotes a shorter swing path. So there's the anticipation of catching usually decelerates the racket more than it should. You want to just create no obstructions for the racket pathway, and you want to accelerate to your maximum and let that racket speed carry post-impact, carry the racket as it's decelerating around the world, and with a finish, preferably with no catch, or at least behind the body, and the catching is not an obstruction of the pathway of the racket. I know the racket's decelerating post-impact. There's no way to accelerate after the impact. But what I'm saying is when people start thinking, they anticipate they're going to catch. A lot of people catch way in front of their bodies, and then their swing path naturally gets shorter, and they start decelerating in anticipation of catching the racket. A lot of times you just get that left arm out of the way, let people swing without a catch, follow through without a catch, and you get a better, more elastic swing. Call me crazy. But these are some of my philosophies for the forehand. This is all outlined in my new book, Winning Pretty. Some people may call it controversial. There are a lot of coaches out there, for example, still teaching very traditional technique. I teach modern technique. I believe in teaching kind of cutting edge stuff. And I see so many people struggling with these areas, starting with those basic building blocks that I mentioned. Talked about follow through. We should talk about like grip. Grip is like big one. With the little time that we have, guys, talk about grip. Everyone wants to fix the grips. What's the right grip? You probably want my opinion on that. I've done a whole show. We did a podcast called Grip Changes, which I thought was a cool title, but maybe people didn't appreciate the pun. But the grips are changing, and grips change over time. Grips evolve. There's a huge debate, should we start kids in an Eastern? Should we start kids in a semi-Western? Sometimes I do both. I definitely try to prevent my students from going full Western when they're young. And I don't like to see adults with full Western, but sometimes it happens. People hold the racket different ways. People have different anatomy and physiology. People have different feel. So one thing I learned studying in Spain is that sometimes you have a Western grip, and you know what? It's not the kiss of death. You can be a top player with a Western grip. You can dominate the world with a Western grip. It's not like a death sentence for your forehand, although it can be a big problem for some kids and some adults. Semi-Western is the standard grip at the pro level. I have another comment and question. Thank you, my friend. Semi-Western grip, of course, is the optimal for, I think that's pretty commonly accepted. You want to get a good semi-Western grip if you can, but everybody's different. Some kids may gravitate towards a little more Western. What are you going to do? You're going to always change it. You may want to change it, you may not. We've done a whole podcast on this. I can talk for an hour about this subject. Sometimes you may want to shift it. Sometimes you may want to leave it. Depends on so many factors. Depends on the kid's personality. Depends on how they learn. Depends on how gifted they are. If they're super gifted and they can get the racket head through and they have incredible timing with the eyes and hand, maybe the Western grip's not going to be much of an issue for them. If they have super fast twitch, generally those are the kids who are going to be better with the Western grip. If they don't have super fast twitch, I'm not going to name names. I have one of the top kids in the country whom I coached for many, many years. I'm not going to tell you who he is. Western grip, I think it's a big mistake. I told his dad. I told everyone about it. Try to change the semi-Western. They didn't go that way. I think he's going to have a lot of trouble because it doesn't have super fast twitch fibers. You need fast twitch fibers to have a really extreme Western grip. And you need to have amazing hands and eyes so you can get, make that quick, get that racket through and reduce the risk of misses and shanks and things like that. So I think the Western grip can be really problematic for some kids who are in that boat. But then with other kids, if they got the eyes, they got the hands, if they got the fast twitch, look at Iga, look at Swiatek, look at Coco. They're top in the world. These are the best women in the world, and they both have full Western Hawaiian grips. And everyone likes to criticize Coco's forehand. She's making a lot of money. Iga's making a lot of money. Most coaches would change those grips. If those two girls were in front of them at 8 or 9 or 10, they would start messing around with those grips. Maybe that would be wrong in those situations. Maybe that's not right. You got to know, this is where the art of coaching, where you're not sure. You have to see the player in front of you. I would encourage you to think about those assessments that I mentioned, those metrics like fast twitch, hand-eye, coordination, things like that about the grips. The grips is a big headache for a lot of coaches and players and I have parents who spend years obsessing about the grip. The Eastern grip, I have another question about the Eastern grip. The Eastern grip is making a comeback because you see players like Alcaraz, very conservative grip. He's almost Eastern. I'll call him a composite. He's very much like Federer in terms of the grip. But that is kind of making a comeback, that grip. It seems to work pretty well for those guys. They hit the ball clean with that grip. The question is, do you have enough racket speed to generate heavy spin with that grip? Federer, Alcaraz, they can do that. For a lot of kids, if they go Eastern, they can't get a good spin rate. They don't get a heavy spin rate. They may not have enough racket speed to do that. So again, I think makes sense that semi-Western is the most popular, versatile optimal grip. But again, there are just so many questions here, so many gray areas, so many things to consider, and it's just a minefield for coaches, for players, for parents. I know this is a tricky one for a lot of you, but I guess my biggest takeaway for you guys is don't do that first. Like almost never do I focus on that first. Sometimes my gut, I see a young kid, they got like a Hawaiian grip. They're basically hitting a forehand with a continental grip, and they flipped it over. I'll change that. I'll change that right away if the kid's willing, if the parents want me to. Like if we're all on board, I'll change that right away. But with a lot of kids, if the grip is not super extreme like that, I'll work on all this other stuff. It's a much better way to coach, by the way, if you're a coach watching. Much better way to coach because it's less invasive. You know, when you change a grip, it's like full-on surgery, reconstructive surgery, as Rick Macy calls it. It's full-on surgery, and that's a great way to ruin a relationship with a kid. It's a great way to take away a player's confidence. I had one of the top juniors in the country. I'm not going to tell you her name, but this is all true stories. And she came to me. She was training at John McEnroe Tennis Academy. And the coach there was insistent that she had to change the grip, that it was too Western, you know. It wasn't that Western. It was like semi-Western, you know. It wasn't super Western. And, you know, she came to me and I was like, you know, I played with her and I saw her hitting the forehand. It's her best shot. It was an amazing shot. She had so much feel for it. You know, at a young age, she had good power, good racket speed. She didn't struggle to print pace on the ball. And I said to myself, you know, just leave it alone. Just don't change it. Leave it. You know. And the other thing is, you really have to think about the kid's emotions and personality if you're going to change a grip. I'm talking kind of the coaches now or parents. You know, some kids are just not at a stage emotionally, maybe developmentally, psychologically, where they're really ready to like take on that project, and you may need to wait, even though you know it's the right change to make. That's another thing. Like developmentally, you have to find the right window. You can't change a grip with a lot of big tournaments coming up. You may not. It's better to wait. It's better to wait. Like if a kid is emotionally fragile and their confidence is so-so, it's not a good time to change a grip. It's stupid to do it at that time because you risk burning the kid out. You risk shattering that kid's confidence for the next few years, and they may never recover from that. So I'm speaking as a high-performance junior coach now. I think that's a big mistake, but some parents are so pig-headed, and some coaches are like, no, it has to be this way, it has to be semi-Western, it has to be Eastern at this age or whatever. And that kind of like rigid ideology is not a good way to approach grips. So let's say you worked on all these other things I mentioned. You get the spacing, you get the balance, the posture, the elasticity, get the kid relaxed. You're working on other things. And then, all right, you want to tackle the grip. You can do it. You can do it. Some kids, you may want to do it right away. I'll give you another little insight from the trenches. Some kids like to experiment with grips and stuff like that, details and technical things. Try to identify that. And this is an insight that I need to put in another video. Some kids like to experiment with stuff like that. If you know the kid's personality, this is for adults too. Adults is a different discussion though. But some kids they have a mind where they're willing to try things. They like details. Maybe they're analytical. And I wouldn't worry about their grips that much. Because if they slip, like if they go too Western and you want to change it later, they're going to be willing to put in some of that work to revert it back. You know, they'll be willing to do some drill. Like a kid who likes to drill, a kid who's willing to do some reps, doesn't get bored easily, it's not going to be an issue. If the grip goes sour, like they go to national clays and they come back with the Hawaiian grip, not that big a deal. Like they're going to be willing to work on it. You know, like they're kind of like a worker bee. They're going to go to work and they're going to put in the reps to fix that. But if you have a player, a student with the personality, like they don't like to drill and they don't even like to think about technique, and they never want to work on detail stuff. They're not analytical. If you have someone like that who's not mechanically minded, it's going to be a nightmare to change their grip later on. You cannot let them slip at a young age. You cannot, because if they do, it's going to be a disaster later on. They're not going to be able to change it back, and it could be detrimental to them farther down the road. So I guess maybe I just got to write a whole book about grip changes and all these different variables, because there's a lot. I'm already eating up a lot of the podcast talking about all these variables, but this is based on years of working with thousands of kids and adults. So I have this perspective that I think a lot of coaches may not have about the grips. Well, and it's a very common question I get all the time from adults, from parents, from other coaches. Very common question, the grips. But don't do the grip first usually, unless it's really egregious and everybody wants to change it and the kid's willing. Don't do it. Do work on the others. A lot of times I'll see a Western grip and I'll be like, okay, noted, duly noted. Put that in my file cabinet, and then I'll say, all right, let's work on the other 5 things that need to be cleaned up first. And then I tell the parents, the grip's pretty extreme. Let's keep an eye on that. Let's monitor that. That is a great way to build a connection with a kid. A great way to lose the rapport and emotional connection with a kid is to try to change their grip early on. Same for serve grip, same thing. You try to change the grip right away, you are taking a big risk as a teacher. And there's a pretty high risk you're going to lose that student just in terms of bonding and trust, because it's going to feel shitty, they're going to play badly, and they're going to probably hate you. So the best way to change a grip is after you've built more of a relationship with the student, and there's a trust there, there's a good bond, and then you can say, hey buddy, your grip's pretty Western, I think we should do something about that. And they'll be more amenable to working on it at that stage, and they won't hate your guts. So there's a little coaching tip or parenting tip for you guys out there. Now, I have some parents who they won't stop harassing their kids about grips, and it's just I understand where that's coming from, but sometimes you have to back off, because in your attempt to solve that and to fix that, you're doing so much damage in other aspects of the kid's development, like the relationship between the parent and kid, the kid's confidence, there's an opportunity cost when you're just working on grip, you're not working on all the other things that I said were important. It's just sometimes you need to back off, monitor, maybe wait for a better opportunity. It's all about timing, especially in junior development. Maybe there's a better window where you could go for it and make the change. Or maybe you analyze the situation, you analyze the variables, and you determine that, hey, you know what? Maybe this kid could still be a great player with a Western grip. Maybe they're going to be able to make it, like Iga, like Coco, like Jack Sock, like Kachanov, there are many examples. Who's got another? Rublev is almost full Western. Rublev's very extreme semi-Western, for example. Nadal is extreme semi-Western. Djokovic is extreme semi-Western. These guys are on the border of Western, and these guys are great players, and there's many others as well. Particularly for women now, it's tough, because you have the 2 arguably best women in the world, more or less, and they have full, not even semi-Western, full Western grips. If you don't believe me, I can show you the high-speed video. It's very, very extreme grips, and they're making a lot of money, more money than I'm making. So these are some of the variables for how, common problems with the forehand, how to fix your forehand. The show's gone pretty long. I think we should stop there, but there's other things. Backswing. I was going to talk about the ATP backswing. Is that a high priority right away? I'll mention it briefly because it's a very, very common question. Backswing. You don't need to go after that backswing right away. If it's a type 1, try to shave it. Whether you're a player watching right now, if you're a coach, if you're a kid, if you got a kid with a giant bubble loop, helicopter swing. Try to shave it, but don't like fully shave it. Don't shave it down to where you just completely shatter the kid's confidence and they can't hit a ball, they can't put any pace on the ball. Try to just, gently encourage them to go to a type 2. Type 2 is kind of like a medium-sized swing. Talk about backswings. By the way, this is after all the other stuff I mentioned. Like backswing is not usually like the first thing you want to work. Working on spacing is 10 times more important than backswing. Anyway, you want to try to get everybody in that type 2 area. I call that the bridge to the ATP forehand. Like it's a bridge approach. You make it medium. And then, over time, the same ways that I was talking about with grip changes is, build the relationship, make sure the kid or adult's in a good place emotionally, make sure they have time to work on it. Like I work with some adults, recreational, competitive, usually competitive. And they have no time to practice. I practice twice per week. I one hit and I play a match on the weekend. You can't change adults' technique like that. If they have no time to work on it. They have no access to a ball machine. They have nobody to feed them balls. They're not going to have time to do repetitions. You have no business changing anything because they're going to be a mess. That's one of the issues I have with a lot of the YouTube and online courses that you see. Like you see hours and hours of technical courses on changing technique, which are completely useless for most adults. And the adults buy them like fools, foolish adults. A lot of recreational players, they just buy in course after course after course. And they're developing a lot of knowledge. Some of it may be good, some of it may be bad, but there's just no way you could possibly improve your forehand with a course when you don't have time to practice. You don't have time to put in the hours on the court. You're much better off taking a very, very simple course or getting a very simple information and going and practicing lots and lots of reps and watching 30 hours of courses online, and then you have no time to practice. Adults should very often work with what they have and train with the Spanish principles that I mentioned at the start of the show, rather than trying to change things like grips or backswings or whatever, because they don't have time and they want to maximize their game. So that's just an aside about adults. But backswings, try to do type 2. Try to get a medium-sized backswing. If you can get rid of that big one, which is the type 1, you get a kid or an adult into a type 2. That's a nice compromise. You can still play well. It's not like surgery. You're not going into a major surgery with the big potential adverse effects of surgery. And then you have the potential to bridge that forehand to a type 3 down the road. I think that's a really great way to go. And probably the kid or the adult, they won't hate your guts for trying to make their swing too small and they can't crack an egg. Because that's usually the first thing people say when they try to learn the ATP forehand. They say, I can't hit the ball hard. This is impossible. I can't do it. I can't get any speed on the ball. I can't hit the ball with any power. And there's a lot of ways to get that, to get the power. The main issue is the rigidity. Going back to this, one of the initial things is most people cannot hit the ATP forehand correctly because their arm is locked. They are too rigid. And so it just doesn't work. You can't get lag if you have a locked, rigid arm. So getting back to the idea of elasticity, which is the main philosophy in my new book, Winning Pretty. Main philosophy is that you need to develop elastic strokes. Elastic strokes are the paradigm shift in the modern game. The modern game is completely elastic. Is whipping. All the strokes are whipping. Elastic and whipping creates lag. If you have lag, you can use a shorter range of motion on backhand and forehand, on everything. That's one of the main, arguments that I make in my new book. And the byproduct, coincidentally, is a beautiful looking stroke because the stroke looks fluid. Elastic strokes tend to look prettier. And when you have good spacing and good balance and all the things that I mentioned, I talked about spacing, balance, posture, relaxed arm structure. When you get those building blocks in place, lo and behold, the stroke or strokes start to look more pretty. They start to look more attractive. And that's just a byproduct. And that's one of the main things I argue in my book, is you want to develop a winning, pretty game, winning, pretty technique. But it's biomechanics first. All these biomechanical things, you get those right. And the aesthetics of the stroke actually start to come together and look really nice. It helps if you have it looks even prettier if you have range of motion, if you have great mobility in your arms, if you're kind of an ectomorphic body type, if you're long and lean, and you're flexible, that also helps with the aesthetics of a winning pretty type technique. But you need, no matter what your shape or size, if you have space, if you have posture, if you have body control, if your arm structure, even if you got stubby arms, if your arm structure is loose and elastic, you will have prettier strokes and you'll have better strokes biomechanically. So that's kind of what it's all about. These are my ideas about the forehand, the A to B forehand, the forehand technique priorities, common problems that I see with the forehand, and I tried to give you some ideas about how to fix these things. A lot of the fixes start with slow balls. The ball has to come slow. You can't learn any of this stuff if the ball is coming fast. So maybe that's a good takeaway too. You can't learn stuff if the ball is coming fast. So you can't watch a course or watch this video, get some tips from Chris, and then go out and blast balls with your buddy, or fire up the ball machine and shoot them at your kid. It's just not going to work. You have to start with soft hand feed, or soft toss to yourself, or soft hitting against the wall, or shadowing is really good, where you just kind of shadow the movement through space, things like that. It has to be at a low speed. And then the initial hitting, this is also a very important takeaway in terms of a fix. The initial hitting, when you're learning any type of new technique, I talked about this in my book, Winning Pretty. You got to start light, soft hitting. So you have to hit very, very softly with your rally partner. Usually a coach is the best person, someone who's a very high level player, but who can give you almost a perfect ball to work on that new form. And particularly for adults, the big problem is they don't have anyone to practice with who's consistent like that, who can give them a nice rhythm. We didn't talk about rhythm. I wanted to talk about rhythm. Maybe another time we'll talk about rhythm, because I believe rhythm is a very, very important thing to work on with stroke mechanics. That's not really a grip or a backswing or a follow through. Rhythm, the flow of the swing, the timing of the swing, how you take the racket back. We gotta talk about that on another show. But so you see what I'm getting at with the fixing? Start slow. If you want to work on any of the things I mentioned in this program, start slow. Start with hand tossing. Don't listen to those people that say hand tossing is stupid. Don't listen, that's not true. That's completely bogus, running around Instagram and YouTube, that hand tossing is a waste of time. It's not realistic. Forget that. You need a soft toss. You need the ball to come slow. And then the initial hitting that you do has got to be at a slow speed with your partner. And that's how you can myelinate any new neuromotor program that you're trying to get. You can get that muscle memory starting slow, and then over time, gradually, as the motor program starts to become more secure and ingrained, you can increase the speed at which you're hitting and hopefully get it up to full speed without any reversion, which is a big challenge for a lot of people. A lot of people make good inroads and they get their technique better, they get their forehand better, and as soon as they start hitting with someone else at regular speed, as soon as they go to a tournament, bam, it's gone. The technique is gone, and they revert back to the old strokes, and they get stuck in that cycle all the time. And some of them just give up on the new technique, which is a shame. But that is a very common pitfall, where players, they almost get the new technique. They start building the new motor program, the new muscle memory, and then they go and play, or they go play at too high a speed and it's lost, and then they give up and go back to the old way, or they say this is impossible. And they were close, but they didn't get all the way to the finish line in terms of learning the new technique. That's very, very common. So watch out for that as well. Guys, it's been a very interesting show. I enjoyed talking to you about technique and biomechanics of the forehand, the ATP forehand, and what I think is really important, which most coaches do not think, and the things that I work on that I think most coaches, especially in the US, are not working on. And I would like to see that, for better or worse. I'd like to see, I can't coach everybody myself. One of the reasons why I'm on YouTube and doing videos, I'd like to see the coaching establishment change. I'd like to see the teaching paradigm change. I'd like to see kids out there learning better technique, better biomechanics, learning how to move better. So, it's one of the reasons why I like educating and doing these videos, because I can reach out and, people around. I'm sharing ideas with a dad in Singapore right now. And I have people from all over the world contacting me and enjoying watching some of my content. And that's exciting for me, because I'm only one single guy with 4 kids, and I'm busy, and I have my students, and not everyone can come to Manchester, Vermont and train with me here and get the full live and in-person Chris treatment. But, with video, the magic of the internet, the magic of YouTube, the digital video, it's incredible. You can reach people all over the world, which is, for me, a very exciting thing. And I think the way the forehand is taught in most places in the world is very, very outdated, very inefficient, and I'd like to see that change. So guys, I will see you on the next program. Adios. God bless. See ya.